particularly a civil engineer that specializes in stormwater maintenance and inspection operations. And we have quite a few clients in the township. Some of them might be here on the call, some might not. But I've put together a PowerPoint and we're going to go through a presentation of some of the things that we look for, some of the things that the township looks for, and a little bit of the background of this program and the state permit and how that applies to some of the stuff that you are supposed to be submitting to the township on an annual basis and maintenance that you're supposed to be doing. So, Tim, I'm going to share the screen now.
Okay.
You hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me just put my dialog box up here. All right, so our company's name is Stormwater Compliance Solutions. We've been around since 2006, conducting stormwater management work throughout the state, and now we're doing this type of work in 4 different states. So, most of you have seen this letter in particular before, or some derivative of this letter that has come from the township. It is a reminder that the township has an ordinance and that you are supposed to conduct maintenance and an inspection on your stormwater facility and submit it by June 30th of every year. So where does this come from? It's not the township just doing this out of nowhere. So the township has a municipal stormwater permit, and that permit obligates them to enforce the stormwater management regulations on private property within the township. And this is not a new requirement. This is something that has been ongoing since 2009, although it feels new because a lot of townships, the regulations from the DEP were not enforced strictly until a few years ago. So that is why this has become so much more of an issue in the last several years. So the ordinance 577 of chapter 11 from the township was created to give the municipality a bit of teeth in the rules in which it could cite and not just use the state statute. So it was a codified ordinance to allow the municipality to enforce these rules. So there's been historically a lot of word I'm looking for is there's NJAC 7:8, the design standards have stressed how these stormwater management systems are designed, constructed on the engineering and development side. NJAC 7:14 is the municipal stormwater permit. This tells the municipality what it's supposed to do with its own stormwater system and those private properties within the township. Some properties fall under the jurisdiction of the industrial stormwater permit, the MTD'S 5G2 permit. I just brought that up because if you have specific industrial activities outside of just loading and unloading, shipping and receiving, like manufacturing of some sort, you could fall under the jurisdiction of an industrial stormwater permit. But for the most part, your property is going to be regulated by the municipality, and it's going to date back to when the property was developed or constructed. In Hamilton, that seems to be anywhere in the last 30 years, 40 years. Some parcels older. So the industrial 5G2 permit, if you fall under this category, you likely know it because you have to prepare a SWIP, a Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. You have to do monthly inspections of your operations. You have to do annual certifications with the DEP specifically, not just with the township. On non-permitted sites, which is about probably 98% of the sites that are affected by this ordinance in Hamilton, you have to comply with the stormwater O&M manual. If the property doesn't have an O&M manual, which it likely doesn't if it was constructed before 2005, we just deflect to the state standards for how the site's stormwater system should operate. The responsibility of that is the property owner or the property manager, ultimately the owner. So what do these basins look like? A lot of the basins in Hamilton are above ground detention basins, like this one shown here. So this is an extended detention basin. That's the specific name for it. And it's a large flat area with berms on the side. It's supposed to gather probably between 2 to 4 feet of water, sometimes more, but generally they try not to make them too deep, and it's supposed to convey that water downstream in a methodical manner. Which is designed to drain within 72 hours after the storm. So that's one of the things that we look for in the inspection, is whether or not the basins are drained when the last level of precipitation was, etc. Some of these ponds can be wet ponds, and then in that case it is called a wet pond, and it's not a detention basin. Detention basins are dry, supposed to be dry. So in this case, this is a wet pond, and what happens to a pond like this, a lot of times you get erosion on the shorelines, which is hard to avoid with the water level going up and down, and you get vegetation, phragmites, etc., that basically clog up the inlet and outlet pipes of the basin. So if you have a basin that looks like this and it's matted with vegetation where the water comes in or where the water goes out, that would be something that would be cited in an inspection, and the township would expect that that would be taken care of in a subsequent maintenance activity. A lot of basins, a lot of older basins, so a lot of basins in Hamilton Township have low flow channels, concrete low flow channels. The design standards today don't call for concrete low flow channels. We like to see usually more of an infiltration basin or infiltration berms or channels, sometimes riprap, sometimes sand, other materials like that. But a lot of older ones are concrete. They don't allow for much infiltration of the water or that much cleaning of the water for the water quality aspect, but they do promote the drainage and the flow in the basin. So this is what happens. The water and sediment back up, the channels get full of vegetated debris, anything that's moving through the pipes, and then it eventually clogs the basin, and then the basin doesn't drain. And back here, this is what's commonly referred to as an OCS, which is an outlet control structure. This is another outlet control structure. So this is a weir with a trash rack on it. There's another trash rack. It's actually elevated here. And then this low flow channel is about 5 feet wide on this one. They're usually between 3 and 5 feet wide. And it's got like 10 to 12 inches of water in it, and it's backed up with leaves and debris. So something like this would warrant maintenance. Something like this would warrant maintenance, although it's not too bad. I mean, this can be cleaned out with hand labor or a small machine of sorts. So one of the things that we look for, this is a large outlet control structure. So the weirs should have trash racks on them. by the current state design standards, and the orifices should have a trash rack over it. If I was going to say which one's more important, it would be the trash rack over the orifice, so it keeps the debris away from the hole so it doesn't immediately clog every time there's a precipitation event. Both are significant in different ways. These large weirs will prevent large debris and garbage from passing downstream or clogging up the drainage pipes. Again, that's a comment that you'll see on a lot of inspection reports, and the township will would like to see trash racks on outlet control structures like this. So sometimes the water treatment cannot be achieved through detention basins, and in that case, the water quality standards will be met through a type of filtration system. So this is a stormwater, this is a jellyfish filtration system, and there is a large pool of water underneath the deck, and the clean water pushes up through these lids and out the outlet pipe. And what we do when we inspect these is we use a sludge reading device, and we measure this sediment on the bottom, like to see less than 16-18 inches, and no oil and grease. And these filters should be cleaned once a year on this specific type of device. It's a little blurry here. So an inspection report will usually have photographs corresponding to the items that need to be corrected, and they'll either have required corrective actions, which is something that really should be addressed immediately. It has to do, the items will have an immediate effect on the performance of the stormwater basin, and then the recommended corrected actions are something that we've put in our reports to aid the property owners in keeping up with some of the general housekeeping and other items that they come across on a yearly basis. So some of them might be, address the erosion at outfall 2, address the erosion on the banks of detention basin B, etc., stuff of that nature. If there's manufactured treatment devices, they'll be listed here. This site in particular had a subsurface detention basin and an above ground detention basin, and those basins are numbered. If we have an engineering site plan, we'll use the designations off of that. If we don't, we'll usually just give our own alphanumeric designation to the basin, just so it's easy to read. Some large sites, and this is not most sites in Hamilton, but there are a few large sites, large being like anywhere north of 20 acres, buildings greater than 200,000 square feet. We usually recommend doing a GIS mapping project of the stormwater system so that we have alphanumeric designations for all stormwater features, and then our report can correspond to these alphanumeric catch basins, outfalls, ponds, outfall here, conveyance structures. We have swales, we have small ponds. So this is really just to make the inspections flow in a more cohesive manner. Again, not a requirement, but a recommendation on large sites. So when is maintenance needed? That's based on the inspection findings. The site O&M manual, which if the site has one, will have specific maintenance intervals as far as mowing, cutting of vegetation. So one of the main things that we look for, if we go to a site and it's unmaintained and it's dirty and there's litter and there's debris and there's maybe, inoperable vehicles on the site or maintenance of mechanical features going on outside of buildings, stuff of that nature, that's usually a key to us that the site is probably going to have some stormwater issues. It's probably going to have oil and grease on the pavement. It's probably going to have contaminants in the detention basin. So even before we really dig into the specifics of the stormwater BMPs, the best management practices, if we see that going on site, we generally know that there's probably going to be an issue. Then on the contrary, if you have a well-maintained, clean site, you have less frequent maintenance. The site usually doesn't have those things that I mentioned. So we generally recommend annual maintenance on certain types of MTD'S. Those are manufactured treatment devices. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then some of the larger items, we'll work with our property owners to budget those items so they can be done. If it needs to be done next year, we'll usually make sure that that is brought to the attention of the property owner. So this is a jellyfish washing operation. This is just how we do it in particular. So the filters are usually pretty black when they come out of the ground, then they get washed, the water gets reclaimed, usually in a burned off basin or inlet. There's one back here. It gets collected, treated, the water I'm saying in particular, and then the filters get put back in. And these are what brand new filters look like. Another type of manufactured treatment device that often needs maintenance, usually every 2 to 4 years. The jellyfish system is every year. That is a context storm filter. And those, if you haven't seen them, generally look like this. They're cartridge filters. They adhere to the bottom of the tank, and the perlite on top is what cleans the water as the water leaves the site. So when you do these type of filtration maintenance projects, it is usually an ordeal that requires confined space entry. So that needs to be done in an OSHA compliant manner with safety adhered to, because it can be a dangerous job. And then going back to the storm filter chamber, there are quite a few of these in Hamilton, maybe not quite as large as this one. This is just a pretty cool picture that we found that I actually took. So this is post maintenance. There's an aisleway for maintenance, so you can walk up and down to get the filters in and out. And this is what the vault looks like after it was cleaned and new filters were put back in. Again, more on the confined space. So some of these things can get pretty complicated depending on usually the site requirements. This, I think, is a PSE&G site. So there was some additional safety that was needed here. So back to the above ground detention basin maintenance. This is a basin in particular where it was clogged with years of debris, needed to be excavated, dewatered, cleared out. The riprap had to be exposed. This was a Reno mattress, so the water could spill out into this is actually just a forebay. A forebay is an area where the water comes into the detention basin before the main detention basin, which is actually behind me in this picture. So this is a little bit of a larger scale project of something that would need to be done to a basin that was left to become overgrown and sedimented in. So this is a small basin. This is a site where we have the basin, instead of having berms, it has walls, and there actually was a low flow channel down the center of this one. It was a concrete low flow channel. We only knew that after digging into it because it was matted by like 10 or 12 inches of sediment. So this is what it looked like after. So we have some litter and debris in here. It really wasn't all that bad. Despite the channel being completely clogged, there was actually no standing water in it. So the control structure was actually still draining the basin. again, back to the low flow channels. This low flow channels make it easy to do maintenance on detention basins. It's not a DEP standard of design anymore, but there are plenty of them still out there. So a lot of basins you'll find, you could see the water levels would rise. In this case, you could see a water level on this head wall. We had some erosion around this outfall. So we installed riprap there to address the soil erosion, and then the basins, the channels were cleaned out, the basin was cleared. Same thing on this basin. So a lot of these things can, if it's really small, can be done through like a landscape contractor with hand labor, or maybe a small machine. This is a small machine, but this is, a little bit more of a involved project. So some of these things, if they're not so big, they can be handled without intrusive machinery into the basin. I'm actually done with my presentation a little bit sooner than I thought. So if you want to do some Q&A, Tim, if you have any questions in particular you want to address.
I think some questions came up in the chat. Let me check. It says, hi, I'm Wayne from RPMG. Just had one question. How will we go about addressing blockage issues outside of property, farther downstream affecting our property, low flow basin function? I represent Society Hill condos in Hamilton.
Yeah, so that's do you want me to address that answer?
Yeah,
there?
go ahead.
So this is something that we run into often, where the ponding upstream onto your property is being impacted by something downstream, meaning your property can't drain because of something downstream outside of your control. Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, is that something that the township could help out with as far as?
And I'm actually, I know what he's talking about. It's there's a stream. The stream is needs cleaning, which sometimes is a lot harder to do than just taking care of a basin. There's permits involved.
So it's something that the township could help address on somebody else's private property, right?
Yes, and they will be taken care of case by case.
Yeah, so not an uncommon problem that we run into at all. Does that answer that question? I hope so. Do we have another one?
Wayne, does that answer your question?
Like you said in the chat, thank you, yes. Looks like it.
Thank you, Sam.
Yep, and Wayne, if you ever wanted to come by the Township Municipal Building, we could discuss it with you further. That would help you try to figure out what's going on.
And we have Tyler, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I happen to work with Wayne. I represent Reliance Property Management Group as well. To elaborate on what Wayne is describing is the basins that are currently on Society Hill 1 in Hamilton. They do not drain at all. They haven't drained for well over a year, and the reason being is that the water in those basins will never be lower than the water level in the natural creek that they flow into. The natural creek, it's part of Pond Run that eventually runs into the Millstone River. And the area of Pond Run that appears to be clogged is on township property or other public property, and there's areas that are clogged up either by tree fall or beaver activity. However, every time there's a significant storm, it backs up and it's getting closer and closer to our buildings because that natural creek won't flow. So in these situations, you know, what's the best way to address that? Because even though we'll send people in, Dan, your organization's actually contracted to do our reports.
Yeah.
We don't know what the best way to resolve the issue is, because you know, every time we get a significant rain, the water's getting closer and closer to the buildings, and it's not any fault of ours. It has to do with maintenance by public entities.
Yeah, I'll take that. That's something the town needs to be working on to clean out the stream.
I would think so, or
Yeah.
even further down. You know, it could you know, it could be, you know, a series of several blockages in the natural creek system.
Yes, we will be taking a look at that for you
Okay.
and see what can be done.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that at least our inspection reports will specifically state if, you know, if the basin is not in good condition because of a downstream effect, and no matter what you do, you won't be able to get it to drain. I think that's something that's an obvious, you know, a point that needs to be discussed in the report and you know, when we submit it to the township. So you know, you just won't be able to bring it up to standard because of X, Y, and Z reasons.
Right. And then one last question, Dan, not regarding these particular sites there, but
Sure.
Jellyfish questions. If the manufacturer's recommendations was every 3 years, should we stick with the manufacturer recommendations, or should we go with every year on filter cleaning or replacement?
Jellyfish, the manufacturer recommends cleaning the filters once a year and replacing them every 3 to 5
Right.
3 to 5 washes.
Okay.
So if you let them go any more than 2 years, they usually will just like plug up and the water won't pass. Yeah. But the replacement that usually that can go quite a few years.
Okay. And then a question on the cleaning. If they're being cleaned on site and they're being pressure washed to be cleaned, all of the runoff, you know, we're everything that's on the filters or in the filters is intended to not go into the stormwater system. So can we clean those on site? Because when we're pressure washing them, isn't everything that we want to keep out actually going in?
Yeah, so you usually should wash them in uplands where the water can infiltrate into the ground. Or if you can't do that, meaning like on a dry meadowed area, lawn area, something where it's just not going to run directly back into the stormwater system. Or the water, if you know, if it's an urban site where that's just not available,
Yeah.
You have to reclaim the water.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. In that case, usually we'll just wash the water back into the tank and then pull all the water out at the end.
Okay.
Jennifer, did that answer your question as well? That's in the chat.
Looks like Jen responded saying yes.
Yes. All right, see, does anybody else have any questions? We have Sean is asking a question in the chat. What do you think the best filtration system is in terms of cost of maintenance? Dan?
Storm filters. The contact storm filter likely replace it every 3 years or so. Probably a little bit less than the jellyfish system. Jellyfish filters are very expensive to replace, and they're pretty delicate, but they just have to be cared for. So I would say storm filter is generally probably your most economical type of filtration MTD that you can do.
John, does that answer your question? Well, you're welcome.
I want to say that. So one of the things with getting rid of the material in a detention basin, so this is a perfect slide that you guys can still see this slide that's up here. So nobody really wants this material. It has like no engineering properties to it at all. It's like wet, sloppy, silt, vegetation, organic matter. That's one of the largest expenses in doing a detention basin maintenance project is getting rid of this fill, especially in Mercer County. So if you could find a place on site to put a laydown area, you know, where it's not in a wetlands transition area, where it's not in a useful area of the site, that's one of the things that we do recommend, as long as it, you know, it adheres to local codes. But some of this stuff is becoming increasingly difficult to dispose of. Mercer County is a waste stream county, so this material can only go to very select few places.
Well, there's not no more questions. In closing, I just want to add that as a township, when the reports come in and we review them, if things are truly can be put off the next year, we will accept that. However, as a town, we're still looking to make sure that they're maintained. The issue we have is that those reports come in with recommended cleaning, and it's the same thing year after year. So the town's perspective is that if there's anything picked up in the report, we will be requiring you to do it, whether it's cutting grass, removing leaves, so as to not to have these kind of situations arise in the future.
So one thing we could touch on very briefly while we're all still here is the Phragmites and cattails that usually clog the basins up. They're in a basin like the one on the left-hand side here where the machine is. This is a mowed basin, so like that has not occurred here. But in a wetter basin, you usually get the Phragmites and cattails, which are just, you know, almost impossible to keep out. Our suggestion and what the BMP manual, the BMP maintenance manual on New Jersey Stormwater. By the way, New Jersey Stormwater, if you guys want to put that link up there, if you're able to do that, has a really good, a lot of information about maintaining stormwater systems. So we recommend cutting the vegetation twice per year and removing it. Not that's the catch-all though, is removing it completely out of the basin. So not just like weed whacking it, letting it mat down in the basin, because that defeats the purpose of doing anything. So it's removing it twice per year. And generally we recommend May or June, like the peak of the beginning part of the growing season, and then September, October. So you can get it twice per year. Daniel, can you talk to us about somebody asked about the services we provide. If you want, you can reach out to me privately about that. I think I can't see who sent that. Sean can. All right, does Samantha, do you have any comments on some of the material that we just went over?
No, I think this was, well, I hope everyone found it interesting. I think it was very useful and, you know, it's nice to have an open, you know, an open plane where, folks can have the opportunity to ask those questions and go back and forth. You know, we're always here at the township if anyone would like to meet with us. But I appreciate you, Dan, setting this presentation up and Tim, of course, for getting everybody together. And thank you everyone who joined the call. I hope you found this helpful. And you know, we hope from the township's perspective, and I'm sure Dan as well, we hope moving forward that you know, all the basins continue on the right path, and we can work any issues out that come along. So with that said, thank you everybody for joining us. And if you have any further questions for Tim and I, you can feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for inviting me and in particular, I mean, obviously the stormwater program has had tangible results in the township. I mean, it's undeniable that stormwater systems are better off in the town. And, you know, the flooding potential and other drainage related features are better off because of this. And, you know, it's not easy to manage a program of that size, and Hamilton in particular is quite large in the development and the infrastructure and in the sheer square mile. So yeah, it's a feat to manage that system. Someone's asking for an email address from you guys, Sam and Tim.
Yeah. And then Dan, it looks there's one more question for you about cattails from Jennifer. Are cattails ever a part of the basin design? My understanding is that they are a natural filter. Dan, you want to comment on that?
I think the answer is yes, they can be if the basin was designed to have that type of vegetation in it. Cattails are one thing. The Phragmites seem to just like to mat the basin down, and sometimes they'll grow from berm to berm. But they certainly can. And if you go on to NJ Stormwater under the BMP maintenance section, you can find more information about the types of vegetation that are permitted, allowed, and encouraged.
Okay. All right, Tim, I'll go ahead and post mine and your email address in the chat for everybody to view.
I did. But you know what? It was just a direct message. Let me just type it to everybody.
Oh, okay, great, thanks.
Oh.
All right, thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
All right, and last call for any final questions from anybody?
I want to say thank you to Dan. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is a first, and I think it's really good. I think it's the way that local government is you know, reaching out to its stakeholders and its citizens. I think it's a great thing.
Alrighty. I'd like to wrap it up. To all, have a good day.
All right,
And,
thanks, Tim. I'll see you around. If anybody needs
just-
to, you can
just
reach out to me privately.
all right, will do. You
Thank
guys have
you.
a good night.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.